Several years ago, after the election of our current Pope, Francis stood on the balcony at St. Peter's to meet his people for the first time as pontiff. On that day, one of the cardinals that was standing beside him was gazing into the distance in very deep thought. An observant news reporter who was covering the story took notice of this and followed up some time later to ask the cardinal in question what was going through his mind at that very moment as he gazed out over the crowd and beyond. He said he was looking at the 3,000-year-old city of Rome, and he was caught up at the sight of the Circus Maximus, which was in his purview there at that point where he was standing. It was at the bottom of the Palatine Hill. And the thought that went through his head was, here was this great racetrack where chariot races were run, where the people would be cheering for their favorite contender, and it was built on a scale that would make even modern-day stadiums look quite small. But the cardinal pondered how a city like Rome, who had grown into this huge empire, was the epicenter of an empire that spanned most of the known world. And as he looked at this city and thought about the history, he found great joy in his heart, for by gazing through what had happened over the centuries, by God's love and mercy, the church still stood strong to the testament of time. Why did I pick this story to open this gospel? Well, firstly, Rome and the church offered two different paradigms of politics and religion. Now, it can be said that these two subjects both are rooted in discussions and sometimes heated disagreements on their own, but together the topics, most people, when they discuss them, they try whatever they can to avoid it. But today's gospel is rooted in this. And to understand what is taking place, we need to take a deeper look at the setting and the time and the place of Matthew's writings. You see, history is filled with governments and empires that have risen and have fallen. And the only authority they ever had was given to them by God's permission from above. This is true today in the Word. So let's look at the author of this gospel today. Matthew, also known as Levi, would have had a personal understanding of taxation and how it actually worked, how it functioned. Now, Matthew, being a tax collector, it seemed like an odd choice for Jesus to choose as one of his 12. But he chose the fishermen, he chose others, and he chose a tax collector. A tax collector, the most reviled in the culture. They were seen as collaborators with the Romans. They were seen as taking the money from their own people to support the Romans. And the more they collected, the more money they made. They were paid on a commission of the total tax that they would take in. But as we know it with God, there is never anything that happens by chance. Everything has a plan. God has everything, and it's a great plan that he puts before all of us. And what we need to do is to say yes. It's our fiat to say yes to his plan and accept that. I don't know how many of you have seen the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of the Christ. I know that it came out probably almost 2 decades ago now. But it was a gripping story of the last days of Christ. And the preamble of the story had Jesus choosing some of his disciples. And in one scene that stuck in my head, and it brought a tear to my eye, actually tears to my eyes at this scene, which was only the beginning of what would happen during that depiction of the crucifixion. I often said that anybody that had the concession for Kleenex or tissues that day would have made a fortune because there wasn't a dry eye in all the theaters. Our church at the time in Hubbard's had rented 3 or 4 of the theaters to run this Mel Gibson movie, and I don't think there was a dry eye in any of the theaters that evening. But why this scene? It's when Jesus is standing in front of Matthew, and Matthew is at his table collecting the taxes, and Matthew catches the eye of Jesus, and Jesus catches his eye, and there's no word spoken. It's quiet. But the gaze that Matthew has on Jesus that day, he knows that he has found everything that he's been looking for in his life. Matthew, a Jew, would have been well taught in the Jewish faith. But this connection between humanity and divinity and the gaze that Matthew has on Jesus' face was almost impossible not to feel the emotion that was felt. So that sets the stage for this taxation and how it would take place and how the politics and how the church would collide. The question is, tell us what you think. And again, a little background. It's a tax. They're talking to him about a tax. But this tax was kind of a special tax. It was a poll tax, which was a head tax. Everybody in Judea was forced to pay this tax. It came out in about the year 6 AD. It was a general tax with all the money that was collected for it went directly to the emperor. None of this was being used for the good of the people, and it was just to line the emperor's pocket to do with as he pleased. And the next question that followed, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Now Jesus, this is nothing new to him. These Pharisees and the Herodians that were with him, they were the followers of Herod. They were always trying to trip him up. They were always trying to entrap him. They were always trying to make him look bad. And no matter what Jesus answered the question with, if it was just a simple yes or a no, there was no proposition of winning. If he says yes, he would be going against his people, the Jewish people. And if he said no, he would be opening up a whole lot of hurt because the Roman authority would certainly follow through with retribution. So, if you read Scripture, you know that Jesus answers a lot of questions with a question. And this is a way he's able to take these unscrupulous Pharisees and Herodians into a way of finding a way through this questioning. So what does he do? It's an ingenious reply. He says, by asking them another question, he also asks for one of the denarius, one of the coins. Seems like an odd thing to ask for, but he asks for it to start a dialogue. He wants to open up the dialogue with his questioners. And the question is, who is or whose image is on the coin? Well, of course, the questioners have no answer but to say Caesar. But Jesus has done the better thing in answering this question. Now, another note that we should ponder too is that any Jew at the time would not have carried or wanted to carry a denarius with a graven image of a political leader on it. But because of the expediency of the currency and the time, it was easier for them to have it, and the denarius was even singled out because it was the coin that was used to pay this poll tax. So now what happens? Jesus, the one that they came to persecute, the one they came to negate, has won the battle again. So these Pharisees and these Herodians, they kind of creep away, amazed not at that they lost, but amazed at how quickly Jesus' efforts to discredit them occurred. You see, they thought again that they had him this time. We've got him. He can't answer this question. We have him. But they were on the losing end again. You see, these political religious leaders of the day thought they should be honored as gods themselves, having supreme authority and expectations of being revered as such. And why? Well, we only have to look at the Messiah who was pre-announced 456 times was the count. He was pre-announced in the Old Testament. They expected a Messiah who was going to come in as a warrior king and rescue them from another time of being under another country's rule. And he wasn't what they thought he was going to be. They didn't think that this was the Messiah that they had always prayed for. After all, who was this man? A carpenter from Nazareth. Lowly status. But it is this Nazarene who again passes their feeble test. So then they have the question. So is paying taxes a good thing, to pay taxes to the emperor? St. Paul tells us that it is proper to pay our debts and to pay our taxes as long as their usage does not contravene the teachings of Scripture and the true intentions of the common good of the people, that is without malice or without evil. See, taxes in those days and even in a day that we live in today are generally intended to be beneficial to society, to provide many of the things and the services that make our society better. But it should never be to be a burden on anybody. You see, we live in this world a corporal life. We are body and soul, but through our fallen nature and our disobedience to the Creator, we need the things of this world. But as Jesus reiterates, when you give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to give to God the things that are God's, when you look at the logic of it and the faith in it, everything is His. So Jesus, who came to us in His humility, taking on human flesh to dwell among us. We can contrast the Pharisees, who I said, yes, probably wanted the Messiah to come. But when He was not what they envisioned Him to be, they rejected Him. The one whom they waited for was met with disdain, to be intimidated, for they feared for themselves, for their own status and their own power, and not for the salvation of God's people. Their frailty led them to dishonor Him and to honor themselves. God is the King of all things in the entire sum of the universe. Some have said that this gospel reading is about Caesar and the king. I say it is about the king, and Caesar was a mild part of the story. So, as the cardinal at the beginning of the homily gazed out over Rome, his gaze was on the church, that the church still stands strong in the world, because Jesus said, that the gates of hell will never prevail against her. And like Matthew the tax collector, whose gaze fell upon Jesus in that silence where he gets up and walks away from everything he knew to follow the one person that would change his life in the lives of all of us eternally. And to us, this is where our gaze must always lie, where we give ourselves entirely to him as his faithful people.